You're more professional than me. I never let people know when I start because I want all the scoop.
That's really bad.
I know.
I presume you are, well, you look, you're in your studio. It looks a little bit like a bunker there. That's in King's
Yeah,
Cross, isn't it?
yeah. It is. Yeah, tile yard. Yeah.
Looks quite plush.
It's a bit. It's the way it's happened is quite interesting. It used to belong to a friend of mine called Drew Masters, who is a film composer, and he moved out. And I was asked to move in here ages ago, and I said, "Look, I really like that studio. It's the only one I really like." I said, "But I can only afford to pay for it for 3 days a week." So they let me in, and now they can't get me out. They'd love to put the rent up.
And you're still on the 3 days a week pay, are you?
Yeah, yeah, but I get to use it more than that, so it's great. No, it's beautiful. It's like a 1970s studio, no windows, no clocks, just a
So no
focus plate.
time. You never know
Yeah,
what time it is. Yeah,
yeah, it's
brilliant.
right in the zone. Yeah,
Now, every interview I've really ever read with you, it always has a reference to the steel forges in Sheffield and this sound that I suppose was really the sound of your childhood
yeah,
when you were growing up. What
yeah.
emotions did that sound have for you back then? What did it mean?
I didn't really, it's a bit esoteric for a young child to think about such things. It was just normal for me. It's only later I've come to kind of post-rationalize it and go, because I just thought I thought everybody had the same soundscape. You know, why wouldn't you think that? We had, we weren't living in a world of internet and sharing ideas and stuff like that. It was just me on my street in my two down house, an outside toilet, no bathroom, uh, with the windows open in the summer and listening to the deep kind of heartbeat of the drop forges zooming up from the valleys in Sheffield.
How
From
have you
from
rationalized it later on then? How have you actually then told
um,
yourself what it is?
I've only rationalised the kind of I suppose it's nostalgic effect it has on me. I've always loved the sound of metal being worked on in different ways because it was just part of my everyday soundscape. I also love the smell of metal being worked on. There's a certain ozonal quality to it which I really like, and it was a common thing in Sheffield. And but the big giant drop forges were the thing because those sounds travelled miles. You could hear them miles away. Whereas when you walk around the city centre at that time, it was all kind of the sound of finishing off and grinding and stuff like that. So I know it sounds a bit like the Four Yorkshiremen sketch, but that's what it was like.
How was your childhood? How was your relationship with your parents? Were they a supportive family? What do you feel that they gave you, and what do you feel that they maybe didn't give you?
I am very lucky in as much as my father was a tool maker, steel worker, and my mum was a stay-at-home mum looking after the family, which is quite common in those days. We had virtually no money. In fact, we'd regularly run out of money before my dad got paid on Fridays, and we'd be stuck with I don't know, Sutherland's salmon spread sandwiches and stuff like that. Like really, really horrible stuff. But it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but they were the most loving parents you could imagine. I didn't know anything other than love when I was growing up. My dad was working so hard that I only really got to spend time with him at weekends. We loved, hanging out together in parks and going and playing crown green bowling in the local park. And imagine working 60 hours a week in a dark, metal dust filled factory. So like the outdoors was a very important place for us, and we had a very strong community. There were lots of people. We knew all the neighbours on the street all the kids of roughly the same age would play football together. in the streets. I look back on my childhood as being idyllic, really, in a lot of ways.
You
Nothing to do with finance, quite interestingly.
Yeah, but so obviously then, I mean, it wasn't to do with finance in the sense there was finance,
Yeah,
but having a father that worked in that industry and I having working class parents, I presume that also the social aspect, which was something that was also transferred to you, because that's something that not has not only been through your music, it's also been part of your life. Uh,
yes.
so
I mean,
how important do you see that as having parents of that class and experiencing their problems and issues as a young child?
well, you see, they saw their problems as being the problems that we would all regard as just everyday living problems. So it's just a different context. That's all. Whereas I'm living in a posh part of London now, Marylebone Lane, in a lovely penthouse apartment, and I'm surrounded by posh people essentially, and lots of restaurants and shops and all the things, all the material things that you could possibly wish for, really. But there's not as much. There's not as much soulful satisfaction, just generally in the zeitgeist of the place, and that's pretty much true for a lot of London, apart from specific local communities in different areas. Um, and so I grew up in a very busy city with a strong socialist perspective, which I regard as completely normal, and still do. I think, why should you not want to look after your fellow man, even if you don't know them? Um, there was no. I never saw any racism when I was growing up. I never saw any. I used to dress in my formative years in the most outrageous ways. I suppose you'd call it cross-dressing, really. Um, I used to wear women's clothes, as did Phil Oakey, all the time. When we went out, it was from the glam period in the early '70s. I was never threatened, never ever shouted at anything. I do think we're now in a different age where intolerance seems to be on the rise, as amplified by social media, and I'm very grateful for my socialist background. I'm very grateful for uh, what my parents taught me to be right and wrong. Seems terribly out of fashion at the moment. In fact, I posted something on Facebook yesterday saying that this new lexicography of framing, reframing, spin, um, handbrake turns. This kind of thing where the normalization of or the obfuscation of reality and truth is a really dangerous thing, more dangerous than fascism, as far as I'm concerned. We're in a kind of anti-truth war at the moment, where it's now being normalised that everything. It's assumed that you can't trust anything that any politicians say, which is really frightening. I talk to a lot of black cab drivers in London who seem to be the core audience for M17 at the moment, and they all know M17, and get talking to them, and all of them, once you scrape the surface, want to do the right thing. No, not all of them, but most of them, want to be decent human beings, but they just have been told so incessantly that everything, all politicians are bad, all opinions are equally bad. So this false equivocation thing is a problem. So at the core of my being is socialism. I believe in people. The art that I create is aimed in a kind of sonic muralist way, as being aimed at people. I regard myself as I want to be one of the people. I don't want to be above them or some kind of elite group. I'm not interested in that, and that's permeated my entire creative career.
But did your parents support you when you went? Um, I mean, first of all, you went to that art collective. I can't remember
Yeah,
what it's called now. But you went,
Mutualist. Yeah.
Meat Whistle, yeah. You
It
went to
wasn't red. That's a very posh way of putting it. It was basically a youth club with a few with a few bells and whistles added, you know. But what came out of it was experimentation in different artistic forms: music, art, sculpture, theatre. But there was no kind of there was a little bit of kind of gentle guidance from the people who ran it, but basically it was our thing.
but there's also a social aspect to it because people came from
Yeah,
different walks of life there. So can you
exactly.
tell me what you encountered and how that was? Can you actually remember going there initially
Oh,
and
yeah.
encountering these different people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was. Well, first of all, I passed my 11 plus and went to the best grammar school in state school in Sheffield called King Edward the Seventh School, which was a kind of, looking back on it now, a wannabe private school. So it's like this big kind of Palladian edifice. It was quite impressive, and all the masters wore gowns and mortar boards, and oh, it was ridiculous. It was ludicrous. It was a state school, you know, and then it became comprehensive halfway through. The standard of education was rubbish, by the way. I thought, looking back on it now, and I'm involved in education now, as you know. I left halfway through the first year of A levels. I just couldn't see the point in staying on. I wasn't going to go to university. We couldn't afford. My parents couldn't afford to support me while I was at university. So even though my masters wanted me to go to Oxford or Cambridge and take the entrance exams, I said, well, there's no point. You know, I'm just got to go and earn some money for the family. We were skint, you know. So that's what happened, and I don't regret that at all. And I forgot what the original question was now.
Yeah, it was just about the people at Meat Whistle and what
Oh right,
impact they
okay.
had
So
on
meat
you.
whistle, yeah,
Can you describe them? Can you
yeah,
describe who was there?
yeah. So I got into. So basically, I was in a. I met the reason I'm mentioning King Edwards is because I met a different class of people there initially, because they came from all a lot of professional walks of life. That's where I met Phil. His dad was the chief postmaster at Sheffield, and but when I got introduced, when I left school, my first job was assistant manager at the Co-op, and one of my friends who is still my best friend to this day, Paul Bauer, who had a band 2.3 at the time on Fast Records, um, became my closest friend, and we met at the Co-op, boning bacon and stuff. And he said, "Oh, you should come down to this." Like it. I'm going, "Oh, it didn't really sound like it's for me. I'm not really interested in acting, but I'm interested in art. All right, I'll come down and say hello." And it was just brilliant. And that's where I met Glenn and Ian from Hem 17. Ian Reddington, the actor, is still a great friend of mine. Lots of people I still keep in touch with, and it was a wide range of people from different backgrounds.
What was the commonality between you and these other people? What were the commonalities between you?
Um, we were all outsiders, I suppose, mavericks, um, from widely varying backgrounds, and mavericks in their own in their own ways. And the fact that you found people who were like-minded was a miracle. So there were some real weirdos. I mean, people who were had extremely original ideas, but were not didn't have the outlet for them until we all came together at Meat Whistle.
Do you think you would have had a career in, well, in a number of things, but music and I want to call it art really, in music and art, without that chance that Meat Whistle gave you? Do you think there would have been another route for you to have success?
I've pondered this question, and I think it would. I think unlikely, because my until I went to Meat Whistle, there were no. I didn't really have a group of friends, apart from Phil Oakey, who went to my school. I didn't really have a group of friends who were of the. There wasn't a pool. There wasn't a gene pool of people that were creative like that. All my friends at school were nice people and everything, but most of them were just interested in getting a steady job and going to university. And I wasn't going to do that because we couldn't afford to. So where would I have met these people?
What
Other
connected
than,
you and Ian Craig Marsh initially?
um, I've never met anybody like him. He was a completely unique character. I mean,
What
um,
way? Please describe him.
um, very quiet, but kind of now I know, kind of he'd be diagnosed now as kind of bipolar, I suppose, but very manic when he was on, and very quiet and reserved and self-doubting when he wasn't. Um, Very funny, very creative, very. I mean, just a great and interesting person, and all the stuff that we did together, the future, the early Human League, Heaven 17, and the early B.E.F. could not have happened without Ian. He also came from a similar background to me. His father was a builder, and it was only later, they lived in a slightly nicer house in a slightly better area of Sheffield, but still working class. His parents were lovely. It was only later that I found out that his parents had won the pools just after we met, and we were wondering how come Ian was getting all these amazing things like early VCRs and stuff. I'm going, where's this money coming from? His dad must be a really successful builder, and he'd won like 100 grand, which is a lot of money in those days, on the pools, and still in the quite a small house and lovely people, and so that enabled him to kind of finance buying his early equipment and recording stuff, and he never let on until later. And I know just an incredible person, Ian. Yeah,
Just want
I
to
was lucky to meet him.
go back just a little bit because we're of similar age, and in that era there was a lot of science fiction in literature. There was a lot of science fiction on TV, and there was the BBC Radiophone Workshop, which
Really
was
funny. Yeah,
radiophonic workshop. Sorry, yeah, which was incredibly experimental.
yeah,
Um, I know that science fiction literature has clearly had an influence, just
yeah.
the names and so on. And you've always been very much interested in the future. But how if the word is how instrumental do you think that the music of those science fiction series and films, Quatermass of Doctor Who, how instrumental was that in actually influencing you in an early age?
Well, completely important. I mean, things like Forbidden Planet, Louis and Baby Baron, and I mean, it wasn't just music; it was everywhere. I mean, loads of science fiction series on TV. Lost in Space, Space Patrol, the marionette program, which is an offshoot, in a way, from all the Thunderbird stuff, Stingray, Fireball XL5. Everything seemed to be about the future, And then, of course, got to my teens and became a big fan of science fiction writing and novels and writers. An enormous fan of the more out there ones, shall we say, like J.G. Ballard and I kind of like Isaac Asimov. I really liked Ray Bradbury, and I mean, there were so many. I just, kind of feasted on science fiction. Couldn't get enough of it, because you've got to understand that by this time I moved into a more modern council house, but we had no books, none, and we had six volumes of different different subjects from the Encyclopedia Britannica. That was it. That's all my dad could afford. So I read those cover to cover about 10 times each. And then as soon as I went to the children's library and then to the main library, that was the highlight of my life at that point, was having access to all this amazing writing. So I've always had a voracious capacity for learning, which it just goes to show how shit that my school was, really, because they didn't identify it or encourage it. So yeah, there's this, and also people forget how absolutely crucial in terms of mood of the times was the space race. You cannot overestimate how important that was. It was, in terms of providing an aspirational target for the future. How exciting! Landing on the moon, for God's sake. We've not done anything that exciting for decades. I mean, there's the Mars mission, I suppose, but that's not going to be anything other than robots for a bit, I shouldn't imagine. So, there you go.
My childhood was obviously different in many ways, but I was totally fascinated by the future as well. And the future in aspects of certain different aspects. David Bowie was the alien, and I wanted to leave. I wanted to get out of my home as a teenager. I just wanted to escape in some way. And, I was into all the science fiction stuff, into science fiction, Philip Dick and so on. And I saw it as an escape rather than, well, I don't know. It seems like there's a difference between my vision of it was an escape from my reality, whereas yours doesn't feel like it was. Is that true?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't really an escape because, right. So here's the way I categorize it. We, socially speaking, had a very stimulating upbringing. We, always had good friends. There was more and more interesting things to do, and because we were denied a lot of ways to passively consume your environment, your social cohesion was really important as teenagers in Sheffield. I always lived in the city, near the city centre, and therefore that's the student area. So there was always this kind of mixing with the student cohort as well, which is massive in Sheffield. So there was a big social kind of excitement in Sheffield, which wasn't predicated on consuming. It's the way I put it, which I think is the major difference between somewhere like Sheffield and somewhere like London. Whereas I came to London, and when I moved down to London in the early 80s, there's so much stuff to do. There's that fear of missing out thing. So you end up doing lots of things, and that's how you meet people, and it's much more random. Whereas this was like, there was loads of things to do, but you bump into the same people all the time. A totally different thing. And so all your kind of common feelings get amplified in a much more concentrated way. I've become fascinated. Well, I've always been fascinated with the effect of cities on people. I mean, I do actually do some lecturing about it with various architectural association and Bartlett School of Architecture, and I would have probably, had my social background been different, gone into architecture or graphic design or something like that, I feel. So in other words, there wasn't really a need. We didn't really feel a need to escape, except it seemed that anybody who had any ambition ended up going to London. And there was a bit of begrudgery by the people who never made it out of Sheffield about the people who they saw it as betraying their roots to a certain extent. But in reality, when we signed, when the Human League split, and we decided to make a real go of it with Hem 17 and B.E.F, we wanted to be on the spot to kind of engage in a very significant way with the record company, so that we could increase our chances of being successful. But because by that time we understood that it was important. It's not just a matter of having a phone call occasionally, because you, with a big company or biggish company like Virgin, it was important to be in their face all the time. And so when we moved down to London, we were actually 5-10 minutes walk away from Virgin Records in Portobello, and we used to go in there 3-4 times a week, for instance, stuff like that. Yeah.
But commerciality can't have played that bigger aspect before, because it feels like a lot of the arguments from the initial Human League, you and Ian Craig Marsh and Addy, and then with Phil Oakey coming in, and he adding a sort of possibly the commercial side of it by being, the look of the band, and also in the direction that eventually it seemed like he wanted to take what was left behind of the Human League. It feels like that commerciality must have been the core argument back then. Was it, or was it something else?
What was the core argument when?
When you split with Phil Oakey, when that happened?
No. What happened was the record label. We signed to Virgin. Obviously, we did 2 albums on Virgin, and they'd pumped quite a lot of money into paying for us to get on various tours with Susan the Banshees and Perubu and the Stranglers and you name it. European tour with Iggy Pop. It used to cost money to buy onto tours for support acts in those days, and this was all we didn't really understand it, but that money was all adding to our unrecouped debt to the record company, and they couldn't break us into the mainstream because we were too esoteric for them. No, they liked that, but they was just not making money. We were trendy, and so unbeknownst to me and Ian, no, not so much Ian, but me, behind the scenes, they were working to separate Phil and Ian initially away from me. In other words, throw me out of the group, because they regarded me as the kind of artistic, more esoteric part of it, and then they were working behind the scenes to get some more commercial songwriters like Joe Callis, etc. involved, and work on and make the Human League into a fully fledged pop group, as opposed to a kind of pop rock avant-garde group. And they knew that I would never have gone for that, because it would have been a complete abrogation anyway, that's the way it happened. It wasn't like us suddenly going, oh, we've got to earn some more money. We were doing everything we could. In fact, we were halfway through the 3rd album when the betrayal of Phil and the record company and management happened. But convert that negative energy into positive energy. Formed B.E.F with the help of Bob last, and Hem 17 was the first project. And as it happened, Glenn was just coming back to Sheffield after being in London for a couple of years, and asked him to be. He would have been the original singer of the Human League anyway, had he been in Sheffield. So it made perfect sense to start a new project and wipe the board clean.
Although Penthouse and Pavement was a success, there wasn't really single success at the beginning, was there? How did you feel at that period with what had gone on in the past, what you just talked about, suddenly being in London, trying to make a success of what you were doing, but still not quite breaking through? That must have been quite a difficult period, or was it, like... No,
I think it was. It wasn't, because bear in mind that we'd also released the B.E.F Musical Quality and Distinction album, so our profile was high. We were on the front cover of NME, Sounds, Melody Maker, with both Hem 17 and B.E.F. And Penthouse and Pavement was I suppose you call it in record company parlance, a grower, but it was in the top 40 for 75 weeks. So the sales were consistent, and that gave the record company, even though we didn't have any big hits from it, they could see the interest that was being shown around the world in different marketplaces. And so I always do this. I always try and do this because it's very easy. It's a bit like I always regard record labels as being a bit like referees in football games. You know, they're very easy to criticise, but the whole thing couldn't happen without them. Largely, it's not quite the same now, but in those days it was essential. So in terms of a record company, they were incredibly supportive to us. So when it came to doing the luxury gap, and we decided to go for the jugular commercially, a large part of that was the fact that they never at any point put any restrictions on what it would cost on the budget for the album. Never mentioned money even. It was like, what do you want to do? Where do you want to do it? Who do you want to do it with? So we said, all right, we'll pick the best studio in London, Air Studios at Oxford Circus. We will work with, we wanted to work with Pete Walsh again from Penthouse and Pavement, but he wasn't available, so he recommended his brother Greg Walsh, which proved to be an inspired recommendation, as he had all the skill sets of working with various soul acts, and Rod Temperton and Jeff Emerick. He was trained by at Abbey Road, and vocal stacking of Heat Wave and all that stuff. He brought that to the table, plus an immense knowledge about engineering and mixing. And so they never, and orchestras, best session players. So they were really an instrumental part of ensuring that whatever the second album was going to be like, we were going to get all the resources we needed to make it as successful as possible, and to hopefully not just in the UK. We were partially aiming also at the American market, because English music was doing very well in America at that point, from the, I suppose, new wave. We were classified under that heading at the time. And so there was a possibility they could get huge advances out of American licensees to put out Heaven 17. And it worked.
Let Me Go was the first
Yeah.
sort of successful single. And then came Temptation with Carol Kenyon. Let Me Go is, in fact, my favourite single of all time.
And mine.
I just love it.
Yeah.
And the Carol Kenyon Temptation was an absolute massive success. What was success like, and what did it give you? I mean, in all aspects.
Right. Wow. Success. I mean, obviously, incredibly exciting. As soon as you're doing it, and you're on top of the pops and all the other TV shows, and you've been flown around the world to different TV shows. Bear in mind, we didn't perform live at the time, so the only way that the record companies had to promote the record was to either film a great video and send it to all the territories, or fly us out to TV shows. Unfortunately, the tactic worked, so we ended up traveling all over the world doing all sorts. We ended up doing American Bandstand in America, and shows all over Europe, you name it. Anyway, so and we got to do really interesting, well-resourced videos too, and we were very interested in this new world as portrayed by MTV, where you could service all the territories simultaneously using the highest quality videos. So we became part of that scene. The net effect of it all was, it just seemed like the party would never end, really. we didn't. I got married for the first time in 1981, and I couldn't fit in our honeymoon until 2.5 years later. That's how busy we were. Didn't have a holiday at all. Because also we were doing my production career was taking off at that point as well, and right in the middle of doing the luxury gap, the opportunity to work with Tina Turner and produce Let's Stay Together, which was my idea, I'm glad to say. It just seemed, it's really difficult. It's like when you're in the middle of that kind of, you're riding that wave, it seems like it's never going to end. And that's not just, it's not arrogance, it's just like you've got no other experience or expectation. And I remember distinctly thinking, right, one thing that characterizes the work that I've done throughout my career, I think, is my sense of daring. I'm fairly fearless when it comes to creativity. I'll have a go at stuff. I'm not musically trained. I can't read or write music, and there I am in a studio with a 60-piece orchestra, and some of the best session players in Britain, if not the world, performing, writing string arrangements with our string arranger, and I'll have a go at anything. And that goes for the production side of things as well. Working with Tina Turner, who made River Deep Mountain High one of my favourite singles of all time. I just, at that time, just thought if I continue being brave, which wasn't really that much of an effort, to be honest. That's not the same as being reckless, by the way. It's you calculate what you think is worth taking a risk on, but you just think if something fails, well, it's like buses. Another one will come along in a minute. I'll just produce some more stuff for somebody else, and that'll be successful. And amazingly, this kind of theory worked until the second half of the 80s, when we kind of ran out of steam with and confidence to a certain extent with Hem 17. But it definitely worked for my production career.
I remember talking to Tina Turner and Roger Davis about Ball of Confusion,
right?
Which was on the album, and I remember they both told me. Roger told me that actually he had to set up a gig in Sweden to pay for the trip to London. I don't know.
Really?
And that when they came to London, Tina went into the studio, just sang it in one, Ball of Confusion, and thought
that's right,
that okay, this was just a rehearsal, and that you had both said, no, that's it.
Yeah,
that's perfect. Is that how it worked?
Yeah, I remember saying, well, we'll do one for Lloyd's. That's what they say, isn't it? So as insurance in case something went wrong, but that's it. It was the perfect performance straight out of the bag. But I've told this story many times before, but she said after she'd finished, she was in the studio for like an hour. That was it. And she said at the end, she said, Martyn, that was kind of difficult to sing. It sounded like there was more than one guy on that. And I said, it's the Temptations. There's 4 of them. He said, who are they? Honest to God, I swear on my children's life. That shows how far she turned her back on soul music, black music. She wanted to be Rod Stewart, really, or Mick Jagger, or a combination of them and David Bowie.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, Tina is such or at that period, I mean, I met her later probably, but such a sort of amazing energy to her, and a wonderful, wonderful character.
But just to finish on the Tina point, she's just a performer in the studio or on stage or on a film or anything. She's just born to perform. So when she performs in the studio, it's like she's performing to an audience. She never got involved in the production of anything, as far as I know. Definitely not with us. She didn't show any interest in it, or mixing, or approval of mixers. She was just happy to be, one of the best soul singers on earth.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Did success give you confirmation of what you were doing, and for you as a musician, as an artist, to actually, wow, we're successful. That means I'm good.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, how else are you meant to judge anything? I
Yeah, but
mean,
then you said you ran out of energy. That was
no, not
in the
energy. No, no, a kind of
inspiration.
confidence and inspiration. But that was 717.
Okay.
That was different. So what happened was, it's a long story, but um, we made our third album, How Men Are, which we were really, really proud of and happy with. And it's got, This Is Mine, it's just great. It's got Phoenix horns on it. It should have been a top 10 hit. And I won't go into detail because it'd take too long, but basically, on the day where it was storming into the charts, and we were due to go on Top of the Pops, the day before, Glenn got out of his Jeep and exploded his cartilage in his left knee and was in hospital. And we phoned at Top of the Pops and said, look, we're hoping to get him out, and we'll see what we can do, bandage it up. He was on morphine, for God's sake. Michael Hurl, who's a well-known asshole, I'm sorry to speak ill of the dead, but turned round to Virgin and to us and said, he can sit on a stool and perform. Said, look, he's on morphine. The guy cannot walk. Anyway, we made an effort. He came down, and he stayed for an hour, and he just couldn't. The pain was too excruciating, and we had to take him out. Michael Hurl, before we left, said, "If you walk out the studio, you will never get on. You will never be on Top of the Pops again." This was our first single off the third album, and we didn't. So we released Sunset Now, another, very commercial sounding hit. Got a certain amount of airplay, but because it wasn't going to be on Top of the Pops, the pluggers found it difficult to place on Radio 1 and commercial radios, and it's like a pack of cards falling. So consequently, there were no real hits off that album, even though I think it's my favourite M17 album. So then it came to the fourth album, and this really knocked our confidence. By this time, we were moving away from just the pure electronic thing. I'd been using a raft of session players for different B.E.F productions, and the stuff we did with. I was getting more confident in production and less confident with M17. So we wrote some really good songs. Some of them weren't so good, but the point is, the palette of sounds we were using was more traditional instruments, and suddenly we lost our vibe, and more so with the fifth album. That's why we got dropped, and it just didn't work really. But what's interesting is how you can how even successful bands can lose confidence in their core strategy. Over a period of a year, 2 years. And I'm sure it happens with a lot of bands, not just us. But also, the marketplace was changing at that point. It was less about experimentation. Record companies were starting to want to control what singles got put out, what the sound was. We were moving into the PWL area of things. Getting into the charts was not just about how good the record was. It was about establishing a brand, and so on and so forth. So you end up with a lot of kind of less exciting, more kind of blue-eyed soul kind of things going on in the late 80s in the UK charts. And so it just didn't seem to fit with us so much. And having such a distinctive voice as Glenn's, which was of massive benefit in the core of our success, suddenly became a problem because people going, oh, it sounds a bit old-fashioned that now, Happened with a lot of people, like OMD, for instance. And a lot of those acts from the early 80s became unfashionable in the late 80s and got dropped. But, as I mentioned, production-wise, things were going from strength to strength. I was doing more soul with Terence Trent D'Arby because that's, I'm a soul man. I used to go to Northern Soul clubs, etc., etc. So Sheffield's a soul city, and
could you dance?
I was not a Northern Soul dancer. I would like to say I was. I had a friend of mine called Moggy. I used to go with. He could. Oh my God, he was an amazing dancer, and he just looked like a normal guy in the street, And just get him on the dance floor, and it's like fucking hell, amazing. I've always been in awe of Northern Soul dancers. Yeah.
Why do we have such an affinity for this period of early 80s, even today? I mean, there's incredible affinity for that. And there's not only an affinity for that, there's, as I saw in Hamburg, and as I felt, an incredible affinity to Heaven 17. It's, like a sort of growing loyalty today for a band that was, in a different period.
Yeah, I think, well, there were several things back then that we were quite prescient about, I think. One is we always overtly stated amongst ourselves in the band that we wanted to create music that would have longevity. I mean, it's a bit presumptuous to say timeless, but that's what we were aiming at. And as far as we were concerned, the nominal timescale we put on that was 10 years. We said, we want people still to be listening to this in 10 years. And here we are, nearly 40 years later. And it seems to be growing in popularity again. And I think what was special about that time, the fuse was lit by punk, obviously. So everything's kind of framed by the kind of explosion of excitement. Ironically, I kind of like punk. I was a punk for a couple of weeks, but it was more about the process that engendered, which is anybody can have a go, right? That's what made my career. Suddenly we thought, we can't be any worse than them. Certain punk bands in the north, for instance, like the Drones or Slaughtering the Dogs. They were just terrible. I mean, terrible. And we shared the bill with a couple of them. And we went, oh, fucking hell, we really are no worse than these. We can do this. And we did. And I think a lot of people felt that. It gave them confidence. And then combine that with record companies who were suddenly awash with cash and wanted to ensure that they didn't have to pay as much tax as they could. They wanted to recycle the money back into signing new acts, so they were just signing just about everyone, who got anything resembling. I mean, look, EMI, for instance, at that time. They tried to sign us, by the way, in 1978, but they were too corporate for us. It was just not right. We wanted to go with Virgin or Island. So, but EMI were late to the party. So it got to like post-punk, 80, 81, and they're going, God, we got to get some of this stuff. Everybody's buying this new wave stuff. Come on, what are we going to get? And so, people like Cabaret Voltaire, friends of ours, with all of, I love them to death. They're our mentors and we'll be friends forever. But the thought that they could make, pop records is frankly absurd. They had to go because they got the new kind of, the whole drum machine thing and the dance fraternity were into them. And they made some good records, really good records, but they were never going to, be in the pop charts. And likewise, our friend Spiz Oil, Spiz Energy, Atletico Spiz 80, whatever you want to call them, who we went on tour with Susan the Banshees, we're still friends now. They got signed to EMI as well. They got huge advances. And I'm going, this is crazy. Everybody's getting signed. You know? So it was an entirely and uniquely different period where it was pretty much a scattergun approach in terms of a lot of record companies. But the ones who, there was financial support, you know, for people exploring their thing. And maybe only, you know, 2 out of every 10 they signed actually broke even. When they broke even, they usually went through the stratosphere. So in those days, where the 80s, where the place was awash with money, particularly the new paradigm to do with CD releases and recycling past catalogue and everything, they're going, wow, we can release all this about 3 or 4 times in the future. All of a sudden, it's like the Klondike, right? That's not going to happen again, ever.
You mentioned Ian Craig Marsh and getting the money from his parents who won the lottery to be able to buy his synthesizer. Have you still got your Korg 700, is it? Your first synthesizer? Is it there?
Yeah, I can show you, in fact. There it is.
Okay. So tell me, what you use that today?
And the System 100.
Oh my God, okay.
And the JP4.
All right. So you've stayed loyal your whole life.
Yeah.
to your
They're the only 3 physical synths I still possess.
Yeah.
Everything else in the box.
One of the things that you do today is that you're a professor and lecturer.
Yeah.
And I presume you impart knowledge to your students. What are the key things you say about creativity to them today?
It's very interesting because the lay of the land is entirely different now. It's very difficult for them to. It's very difficult for young people now because what's the purpose of signing to a record company? It's to use their marketing clout. It's to use their knowledge and their contacts in the music industry internationally, you know, their sub-licensees, blah, blah, blah. So that's not changed. But it's possible, obviously, to release your stuff yourself now. And I think a lot of young artists are being encouraged to go down that route. And I think it's a little bit disingenuous a lot of the time because you still need to promote your work. There are various platforms like DistroKid, for instance. I could write an album this morning. I could knock out an instrumental album, have it out on all digital platforms for sale or free within a week. And it cost me 15 quid a year. So if I can do that, everybody can do it. So it's how you direct traffic to what's coming out next. So for young people, this is immensely difficult. And I deal with, I teach writing to commercial brief as my module as part of my work as principal of Tyler Education MA courses in commercial songwriting and production. And writing to commercial brief, as far as I'm concerned, is now about telling young people that most people in the music industry or creators have to have at least five, maybe more different strings to their bow to make ends meet, to make one decent career. It's highly unlikely you're going to be Ed Sheeran. It's highly unlikely, or equivalent. And the vast majority of people have to perform live to make ends meet, which is good. But the recording field is very difficult now. Very, very difficult. I mean, you're literally earning nothing from Spotify. It's a disaster, So, for instance, with Heaven 17, we are not releasing. We've not released anything for a couple of years, but when we did release stuff a few years ago, me and Glenn just decided not to release anything digitally at all. Again, it's all going to be on vinyl, directly via our website, because that's the only way you can make money out of it. Make things like collectibles,
So finally, what do you learn? What have you learned from them? As an older man with younger people who are coming into the business, what do you learn from them?
I love their talent, their energy, their the joy they have in learning. Right, being able to research is a very important thing easily on the internet now. So, it's like having the musical equivalent of the Library of Alexandria on your mobile phone, isn't it? Really, in terms of music, you can pretty much listen to anything you want. And now with podcasts, you can pretty much listen to all the people who are your favorite creators a lot of the time. So, the joy I see in my students, and I do a lot of one-to-one mentoring as well, revealing to them the provenance of the things that they like is a joy, because then it's like I regard teaching as being like being a traffic cop now. It's more about directing traffic than it is about actually imparting your knowledge. It's about teaching them which rabbit hole to go down, and then setting them free. So that's a big difference now. The kind of research that would have been needed to do that in the past would have taken, weeks in the National Sound Archive.
Just finally want to say, you said the 70s in Sheffield, there was no racism, there was a sense of community and so thing. So on the 80s for me in London was sexism, racism, homophobia, misogyny. But there was one thing that was brilliant about it, and it was music, and it was in particular your music. So thank you very much.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Up there is an interview I recommend. Down there is where you can find all the podcast interviews, and here is where you can connect.